Namaste. I'm Narayanan Komerath, an aerospace engineer by training and a researcher and professor in my career. Recently, researchers have shown a continuity of civilization from Hanoi to Haifa, Hanoi in today's Vietnam, all the way to Haifa in today's Israel, with a common communication medium, trade, culture, and technology, with the Sapta Sindhu region of Bharatavarsha being the trading center. Very few people, especially in India, seem to be aware of the implications. My aim is to show how we can go back from the Saraswati era, that is from about 4,000 to 7,000 years before the present era, back in time towards 100,000 to 140,000 years before the present era. Long span history. I propose to use techniques that are used in aerospace engineering, both in the science and technology development and in project management aspects. I have been thinking how I might have planned technological developments. If I want something to be ready at a given time, say next February 23rd at 8 p.m., what should I accomplish and when? What do I need to do now? This is the countdown approach. You are all familiar with it from rocket launches, where someone counts 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition. That process started years back, maybe with Y minus 20 or Y minus 30, when they first planned the mission, is in years. Down to days when they said D minus 720, we only have 720 days left. Down to H minus 23, okay, hours, and then down to T minus something in seconds. If any step does not occur, the countdown is stopped and started again only when that step is done, no matter how long it takes. So for every product seen in the market today, or let's say a coconut tree seen today, the planning had to start way back. The development had to start way back. That huge tree today started as a sapling 10 or 15 years ago, and that meant that there were other coconut trees around at that time, so on and so forth. Many things had to come together, from communications to interactions with other evolutionary streams. Today, the pace of innovation is exponential. We all hear about this. So many revolutionary products, disruptive technologies are coming up. The time to replace one technology with a new one is getting shorter all the time. So that means that if I go backwards, it must have taken longer and longer. How can we model that? That is my question. So here I explain the need for such an approach. And I try to present 3 levels of analytical models and consider 3 examples. Okay, now that you have seen this, I'll discuss this in further detail as we go along. Now, you're all aware of the issues with history of technology, the whole field of history and technology. I have discussed what I found in the paper. I'm not an expert on it. I know very little of it. So being ignorant and an outsider, I can say whatever I please. But you can read it for what it's worth. There are some good sources of data there, of course, and also some prior work on technological determinism and evolutionary ecology, and many other such big words and big concepts. But for all that, I don't think I am reinventing the wheel here, as obvious as it may be. And you can read here, well, I don't want to depend on the history of science and technology field as it exists today, centered in the West. They don't have any empathy for us. Why not start with a given discovery and move forward? This encounters in fluid mechanics, if you try to do this, you encounter what is called the Lagrangian instability. You start from one point and it may go in all kinds of directions because of the errors involved. In innovation, there is a thing called the Gartner hype curve, okay, which shows how innovations go through violent oscillations in market acceptance. And he sets out 5 things. One is the innovation trigger. There's something happen to make something happen. And then there's an innovation and it immediately gets published in the newspaper saying, oh, our so-and-so discovered something brilliant. And that's peak of inflated expectations, followed by the trough of disillusionment when reality hits, or people just don't pay attention. Then comes the slope of enlightenment, which is fairly slow, and then a plateau of productivity. So here, the trouble is that many innovations simply died. So if I start with something that existed sometime and move forward, it may lead nowhere. It might die in the sands of the desert. Instead, I try moving backwards. In brief, I say, if X was observed in 2020, when did it have to be invented at the latest? What other Y, Z, etc. had to exist, and by when? This is a better use of research resources, I feel, because at least we will acquire the competence of the people of 10,000 years ago. I may learn to weave baskets. I don't know how to do that, or mats. And I may learn to make pots with nice inscriptions. That's a tremendous skill. I don't think I'll manage to learn that very well. What is my motivation? There are 3 points of motivation. One is the stunning implications of the Saraswati discoveries. Suddenly, we now have data. Okay, if we are willing to take the time to go and mine through all that and see what they're saying, there's a huge and fast increasing amount of data. The second is, if you look at the history of innovations, this is from the National Science Foundation in the United States, 93% of venture capital funded great ideas die as enterprises within the first 2 years. And these are the ones that were actually funded by these venture capitalists who go through due diligence, et cetera, et cetera. So why and how did some survive? This is the real story. And the third part is unhappiness about what I learned in the social studies textbooks as a student. I have a suspicion that they still teach the same stuff half a century later. So I want to explore the ecosystems around Bharatiya civilization. So some things I accept, okay, down to about 140,000 years before the present era. I don't know what happened before that. I don't think I have a really good way of finding out what happened way before that. From there down to about 4,000 before present era, there is a big hole in history, which is what I want to fill. I will propose 3 analysis methods. The first is a method from chemical reaction kinetics. The second modifies that to model flat delays, which are not part of the first model. The third is deliberately chosen from machine language artificial intelligence in order to meet up with ML AI-based classifications of the Saraswati civilization findings, which I hope will come about soon if Indian researchers take interest. So the first one, in chemical kinetics, the conditions for even a simple chemical reaction are as follows. There has to be, incidentally, this is about the only thing on which I have some competence. I do have a PhD in turbulent combustion as it relates to aerospace engineering. So we had to learn this thing and I passed the qualifying exam. I can tell you that. So there has to be a collision between 2 molecules to begin with. It has to be with enough energy or speed to break bonds or overcome a certain level of binding energy. It also has to be at a particular orientation. And after having modeled all these things, there's still a large factor of chance that is unexplained. Perhaps in some future date, they'll figure out it's the spin quantum. I don't know what it might be. Similarly, adoption of an innovation requires many people. They have to communicate, they have to agree, they must have a dire enough need and enough resources to buy it. And then some magic has to occur. before they actually open their wallets and buy something. This is the Arrhenius model that explains combustion reactions. It also explains why milk curdles, apparently. I have not checked into that. Okay. It seems to fit the exponential rise of innovation today. So I use the same expression to go backwards and predict the typical time that it took between events. So see these two items. I have placed here the Bactrian cup and the Aranmulla mirror, or Aranmulla Kannadi. More on those later. And I placed those at the times when they are reported to have been found. The ones that have been found were dated to those times. Let me put it that way. Okay. The second model, I don't have a slide there, it simply adds a flat time delay to the exponential function. It helps model many things in reality. For example, bureaucratic delays. There's no sense of physics that can explain that. And this is the third method. This figure is from a course I recently took on machine language, so that's about all I know about that. The point is that to reach the eventual output, the inputs came from numerous sources, all connecting to numerous intermediate layers with paths that had different weights, importance, or delays. By iterating back and forth, a best path is identified as perhaps the path of least resistance, but all inputs still contribute to the output. The relationship is typically far too complex for humans to comprehend, but given enough data on which to train, the network becomes increasingly reliable and accurate. The trouble with this is that the machine does not know why the path became the best one. It has no knowledge of physics or chemistry or human behavior. It just has the data. We could construct a rules-based knowledge model for the paths if we knew enough. But I tried that. And as I showed here, it will take a lot of work. I don't have the knowledge. Perhaps as we go along, we should do our best to keep this moving forward. Now let me consider three examples. The first is the Aranmulla Kannadi. With a very special combination of copper and tin, it is possible to make a surface that is hard, it resists corrosion, and it can be polished to mirror-like sheen. It is white, although it is 68% copper. Think about that. This mirror was a crucial part of civilization. I claim that this is what turned colored stones and crystalline carbon and gold into precious commodities, because people could see themselves wearing these things. Okay. But how did this happen? Aranmulla is in Kerala. There is hardly any tin in India. That comes from Vietnam or other parts of Southeast Asia. How did they figure out how to make these very precise alloys? Each experiment involved melting metals and then polishing the mirror very hard. How long did all this take? Next comes the Bactrian cup. Look at the detail on it. This is a silver cup. Look at the artwork. Drinking was a minor part of its function. You'd almost hate to drink from this, saying, oh my God, I don't want to insult this piece of art. It served to advertise metalwork and art. How long did it take to develop that? I tried to estimate it. And I estimated around 230 years, and no fudging, 233.3 if you want to be ridiculously precise. That's the first cut. Does this make any sense? 233.3 years, that's a long time. Let us put that against that figure that I showed you before. And I see where I put the mirror. And well, there you go. At those times, 4,000 to somewhere around 5,000 before present era, it would have taken about 0.2, somewhere around that. It's not out of the ballpark, so to speak. So I'm setting off fireworks here, celebrating my model, but I had to remember reality. My model was based on totally arbitrary parameters. So this is just the luck of the novice. Okay. There's no knowledge here. But the approach seems to have a little bit of promise. The most amazing thing that I discovered in this process is that of celestial navigation. There is a very, very simple method to navigate, at least in areas north of the equator, just north of the equator, like South India and North Africa. It uses a piece of wood and a string. That's all there is to it. On a clear night, when you can see the stars. But how did they develop this? It meant that they had very sophisticated astronomical science and mathematics, which they then reduced to simple engineering, craftsmanship, and crew training. Somebody did not start with a piece of wood and a string and just look up and invent this. It came from the other way. So what did these people know? So they knew that one never reaches the horizon. They also knew that the sky looks different from different places. So did they not know and did they not figure out that Earth is a sphere? Surely they must have. So here I make the point that these three innovations are very closely cross-linked. Okay, and nothing more than that here. You can read the paper for the details. And it must have led to all kinds of things. So my approach to the long span history of Bharatiya Itihasa realizes that technological advancement is a long drawn out, convoluted, and very uncertain process. Adoption needs a pain point. I'm now throwing out some terms that I learned in 3 months of what the National Science Foundation called the boot camp of customer discovery. It was brutal. In fact, my student and I tried to keep our spirits up by giving names to the instructors based on mythology. We named all the instructors after Rakshasas. There was a Tadaka and Shurpanaga and Bhagan and people like that. I have to respect those people. They actually managed to teach me a few things. So, pain point, the final value proposition is often very different from the original. It propagates through slow customer discovery with pivots and delays at each step. The correct path has to be complete. Remember our countdown, even one missing step would even invalidate it. So there is a closure check, as we call it in theoretical development. There's one way to see if the answer that we've got makes, it's a sanity check, in other words. When this is done with rigor by researchers in Indian institutions, this process will produce time and space resolved technology maps of the ancient world. At minimum, it will improve understanding of our own ancestors from our own point of view and our traditions and our empathy for them, and of the galaxy of technologies that are woven into our current world. So this is my last slide. The complexity of this massive endeavor is huge, but it is tractable with modern tools such as the internet and machine language AI processing, artificial intelligence processing, provided that many Indian research institutions participate. This is really a collaborative endeavor. No one person is going to although in reality, much progress is made by a very small team, and then everybody else might get inspired. But this really requires everybody working together, just like our own technology development in the distant past. Traditional archaeology and history of science and technology provide recent artifacts and records. I certainly don't intend to disrespect that. I have suggested 3 levels of analysis: the Arrhenius reaction rate model, a 2-parameter model linked to that, and then back propagation. And on top of all these comes empiricism. You need good interpretation and very careful experimental science on top of this. Initial exploration shows promise. That's all I can say. The Saraswati knowledge base provides crucial linkages and information, which they are developing very hard to build a global picture going back at least 10,000 years before the present era. Examining how communities reached a given level of capabilities at a given time will lead to the preceding 100,000 years and so on and so forth to the 2.65 million years before present era presumed origin of humans or human precursors on Earth. So I hope somebody thinks about this and start some work and organizing things on, perhaps we could organize a conference on this at some point much later when there are many people working on it. So thank you. And again, namaste. That's the end of my presentation.